All right, hello everyone, and welcome to this Aptego webinar, a step-by-step guide for navigating high-stakes audits. I'm your host, Robert Hilson of Aptega, and we have the pleasure to be joined today by our presenter, our Provost, who's the VP of Security Services at Filament Essential Services. In that role, and Art, tell me if I'm missing anything here, but among other things, he coordinates response and manages all third-party technical audits and assessments. He leads investigations into security incidents, and he works with the Filament design and operations team to meet the compliance needs of clients. Art, thanks a lot for being here. We really appreciate you doing that. Tell me, first of all, what I missed in your bio that's important, and secondarily, tell us more about Filament Essential Services.
You caught the highlights for sure. I do run the security program here at Filament Essential Services. We are a not-for-profit in Lincoln, Nebraska. We specialize in helping other not-for-profits focus on their mission by taking care of the essential services that we do specialize in, allowing you to do the things that you're trying to do with your nonprofits. Over the course of my career, I've been through quite a few different industries. Started out with the Department of Defense, worked in the Air Force, working on security for I'm still not sure how much of it I'm allowed to talk about, but I was part of the strategic war planning systems, worked on the National Nuclear Defense Strategy in the early 90s. I transitioned from that into credit cards because that sounded like fun. I worked for First Data Corporation for about 10 years in both their information security department. A couple of things I got to do with them included putting the first firewall in place for the company that was processing 95% of all electronic financial transactions daily. They were working
that's like the first person walking on the moon. They're very.
That's how it felt. I transitioned from that over into their corporate audit department and really started to develop understand the need for process. As a young engineer, I like to do things, do new things, do them clever and uniquely, and figure out the most elegant solution to every problem that ever came in. And on the audit side, I learned the value of process and what that did for the availability and the stability of the system. I moved on to a couple of other Fortune 100 companies, worked in their audit departments, their security departments, and about 11 years ago now, I found this company here in Lincoln, Nebraska, that is subject to federal regulation for its security program, and they were looking for somebody to just take on that role, dealing with the external regulators, dealing with their auditors, and putting that program together. We've been fairly successful with our regulators. I won't name them right now, just in case they're listening. And as a result, we were able to take that show on the road a little bit, and we've been working with other organizations across the country and helping them either kickstart their security programs or shore up their security programs where there were some needs, and act as a virtual CISO in some cases, act as an assessor in others, and perform compliance audits where those were needed.
Excellent. So we're in good hands here. I do want to say we're probably going to go between 30 and 45 minutes. This is meant to be conversational, so please pipe in your questions as they occur to you. There's a little questions widget on your panel. I'll field them as we go, and I'll be probably popping into. But with that, Art, we appreciate the intro. I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much. So we titled this a step-by-step guide to navigating the high-stakes audits. I've got all of the initials after my name. For those of you who are technical, that means that at one point or another in my career, I had the ability to pass a test, and then paid the ongoing membership fees. In my industry, I do have to have those. It does help to advertise them. But as a person who's an engineer at heart, I also know that having a lot of credentials doesn't necessarily make somebody smart. Hopefully I am able to show you or give you guys some gems that you can take with you and survive or even thrive through your next review. So things we're going to talk about today, the general audit process, what that looks like, some of the challenges that we had with evidence management and artifact management, making sure that we had everything that we needed to be able to show that we were compliant with whatever security program we were trying to demonstrate our compliance with. This is in partnership with Aptega, and full disclosure, we did partner with them last year, and we are reselling the Aptega product. They're not paying me to do this. I am. This is one of those commercials where I say I'm not just the president, but I'm also the client. There is we have been using Aptega to manage our security program for the last about year and a half, and we have resold their product to several of our customers to do the same. I'm going to talk a little bit about the way we've implemented it and how it is really an evolving solution. It's not as with any security program, it's not a one and done. We are constantly learning from the way we have implemented it, the way we put it together. And I'll talk with you a little bit about the results of the first audit that we went through with Aptega in place. So the general audit process, this is the way every audit I've ever been a part of, whether it's on the auditor side of the table or on the auditee side of the table. It starts out with scoping the review. The auditor wants to make the scope as wide as possible so that they can look at as many different things and get their and get as many findings as they can, because everybody knows auditors are paid by the finding. They're really not. But auditors tend to want to have their hands free and make the scope broad so that they're not constrained in what they're able to look at. The auditee, it's really on the auditee side to make sure the scope is as narrow as it possibly can, so that you can't you avoid the evil scope creep with your auditors. It's always a great feeling when you're going through the interviews and the auditor asks a question and you just get to point out that the question that they asked may be relevant, but it's not in the scope of the review, so you don't have to answer the question. Once you and the auditor agree upon scope, always get that in writing. Make sure you know how that you have that scope defined so that you can go back to it and recognize when they are moving outside of the scope of the review. They should provide you with that evidence request list. The evidence request list, depending on your timing, you usually scope the review out a few months ahead of the actual on-site review. You get that evidence request list, and if you're anything like every other engineer I've ever worked with, you kind of put it off, and then the last week before the audit, you're running around trying to make sure that you can prove that you're doing this or prove that you're doing that. And it's a you end up performing that Herculean effort to try and gather everything, get it all put together, and be ready for the auditors when they come on site to do your review. The interview process, I liken that to the worst oral exams that you ever took in high school. The auditor will, in years past for us, we have the control family that we're subject to is by regulation is NIST special publication 800-53. There's roughly 175 controls that apply to us, and under those 175 controls, roughly 400 more subcontrols. So in doing our annual audit, the auditor is asking me questions on all roughly 575, 600 controls and subcontrols that we are required to provide that evidence for. And either the engineers that are performing the process, the human resources personnel, the facilities management teams, whoever is involved in that have to be able to answer honestly with how they meet that control, and then how they are and be able to refer to the evidence that they provided in order to support the statement that they made that for how they're meeting those controls. Eventually, once you get through all that, which is depending on the size of your program and the scope of the audit, a couple of days, couple of weeks, I do always coach my Robert, pop back on camera because I'm going to do a little interview coaching here real quick.
Let's do it.
All right. In this case, you're the auditee and I'm the auditor.
Okay.
Robert, do you know what time it is?
I do.
That's the right answer. Nothing more, nothing less. Answer the question that they ask. Don't give them any more information than they requested. Thanks, Robert. You did that well without coaching.
Thank you. By the way, you can't hear the laugh track, but just know that it's going on in the background.
I laugh at my own jokes enough that yeah, that's probably a bad habit. With engineers, auditors know that they're proud of the work that they do. They ask questions about the work that they're doing, trying to get them to expound upon the information and find the thing that the auditor is looking for that will maybe translate into a finding. I fell victim to this early on in my career. We had some external auditors in from Ernst & Young. My boss and I had a disagreement on the way we were doing something. The auditors came by to talk to me about a week later, and it was still fresh in my mind. And first time I'd ever been through an audit, and they asked me a question or two, and I gave them a dissertation. We needed better firewalls here, 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 here. I couldn't get the budget to get it. It was a horrific way for a Fortune 100 company to be underfunding their distributed systems security department. And I just went on and on and on. And almost everything I said ended up as a finding on that report. And that was like that first lesson that I had in how to properly manage your both your external and internal audit teams. I was legendary for a while there. Once you're done with the interviews, the auditor should present you with a draft report. There is almost always that remediation period between giving the draft report and getting the final report. Use that remediation period to either argue out mitigating controls for the findings that they have. An example is we have a control where we're required to be able to prove separation of duties. One person shouldn't be able to manage the firewall, stand up a server, put data on that server, and route traffic through the firewall to that server. Right, that should be something that requires at least collusion between two people to perform. In the case when we first started, we had a small enough IT team that we didn't have, the guy who ran the firewall was also a domain administrator, and he was the backup guy for routing. So he could have done all of that all on his own. So we didn't have great separation of duties. So what we did was we tried to find a mitigating control. We created a syslog server at the time and pulled in all of the syslog, all of the logging information from all of the systems that the administrators had access to the syslog box. And because at the time, I knew syslog pretty well, I was the syslog administrator. I gave everybody read access to the logs, but they didn't have the ability to write to it. So we created a separation of duties control by using monitoring as opposed to a preventative control. So during that remediation phase, that's where you get to argue either compensating controls or mitigating controls. In the end, you get a final report. If there are any findings on there, you have between now and your next audit to make sure that those findings get cleared up and squared away. So that's where you would put whatever resources you have into your security program into those remediation activities. That kind of fit for how that's general how most audits go. There may be some variances based on the security programs, but this is most of them that I've ever been through have gone very similar to this.
Hey, Art, before we move on, there was a question about the scoping process, and I'll try to kind of interpret it, but you mentioned that the auditee's job is to basically narrow the scope as much as possible. Is there any concern that kind of during that process and trying to narrow the scope as much as possible, that can come off to the auditor? It's like potentially elusive and it prejudice you kind of down the road, or is that not a consideration?
The way to manage it, so really when it comes, especially if you're dealing with a regulatory auditor, I had this experience at one of the other organizations that I worked for had a very flat network. And when we were talking to, they handled credit card payments, so they were subject to PCI DSS. We'd had a couple of PCI DSS reviews done, and because it was when we described scope to them, they were always they had always accepted it. We had in prior years, we had another auditor come in to do our PCI DSS review. As a general practice, most companies tend to rotate auditors out just to make sure you're getting fresh eyes looking at your system and make sure that if there are things that you need to be taken care of, they're identified. What we hadn't done is, because it was a very flat network, there weren't the logical separations between the areas that we wanted in scope and the areas that we didn't want in scope. There was no real good logical separation for them. So as a result, the new auditor decided that the entire network was in scope. At the time, that company didn't have the entire network maintained in a way that it would survive that type of audit. We did have a few very antagonistic meetings back and forth with that auditor, and what we ended up deciding was we would put a pause on it, and during that pause, we were able to, this was the nice thing about being at a very financially liquid company, we were able to buy roughly 100 Cisco ASAs at the time and put the specific servers at all of the specific locations, as well as the personnel within their own logical segments, and basically firewalled them all off into PCI DSS compliant segments. The auditor came back in and they were good with doing it that way. So don't look at it as like antagonistic. It's you're really trying to make sure that you and the auditor are on the same page. And most auditors will really appreciate that. They'll want to make their pressure is to make the scope bigger, and they'll understand that your pressure is to make the scope smaller. So as long as what you get to ends up matching some sort of logical boundary that you can make rational sense to both you and the auditor, you shouldn't get into like an emotional war.
Well put, and keep the questions coming. Thanks, Art.
No problem. All right, so in gathering evidence, this is where doing this, we've kind of evolved our process over the last few years. Our initial regulatory review. So our regulator came in and said, we're looking at NIST 853. We want to see evidence for all of these controls. They gave us an evidence request list. These are the things we're looking for each of these controls. All right, great. As the security officer, I'm running around. All right, I need account management reports from you. I need new employee hire forms from HR. I need, just grabbing everything I can, and basically, as I was checking it off of a spreadsheet, threw it all into one directory, uploaded it all to the regulator, and said, "Here you go, sort it out, have fun." That review, it wasn't the remediation for that review. I think they had 75 or so initial findings, and it just took a little bit more explaining and a little bit of talking with them during that remediation period to knock it down to 2 or 3 on the final report. But the next time the audit came around, it was I had a mess, right? I didn't have a whole lot of there wasn't very much organization in there. We didn't have a consistent naming convention. We didn't have any way of mapping each of the pieces of evidence back to the control that it came from. So I decided I'd go with subdirectories. So we had the directory first. The subdirectories would be that first window under evidence there, where I list out the different control families that are used in NIST 800-53. Access control, awareness and training, audit and accountability. I use the 2-letter abbreviations. And then under each of those, I would have all of the AC evidence, and then all of the AT evidence, and all of so on and so forth. That worked a little bit better. It was a little easier to manage. It chunked things up for me a little bit. But there are some pieces of evidence that would make sense to use in both say access control and secure communications. So in this case, I was maintaining 2 different copies of the same piece of evidence, and it was still kind of difficult to maintain that that mapping of each of those back to the controls that they were, and not having 2 out of sync copies during the next audit. So next audit, we split it out a little bit more. Each of the control families got their own subdirectory for each of the controls. So now, instead of just having everything under AC, it would go under, AC would have AC1, which is policy and procedure. 2 is the account management controls. So AC1, easy, I got 1 file, I got the policy for access control. AC2, it's got a whole lot more evidence in there, because that's showing all of the different places where we're maintaining account information, showing that we're actively reviewing that, showing that we're keeping records of why a user was created, why a user would have been transferred, and why a user would have been disabled or terminated. A lot of that information will spread to other controls, both in AC and in other control families. So once again, I'm having a lot of version control, making sure that if I update it in one place, I'm updating it in the 5 other places that I might be using that particular piece of evidence. The organizing and reorganizing, I ended up, one unintended consequence of this, and this was one of the analysts that worked for me did this. He wanted to put all of the full control name in the directory, and we ended up making directories long enough that we broke the Microsoft file system. So that's that wasn't a that was a fun learning. Little bit of an error and tracking that down, trying to figure out why it wasn't working. Like I said, about 1.5 years ago, we did start using Aptega to manage our excuse me, to start managing the security program. I use some of the pictures from their website here. One of these days, I will I'll get them off of the use of the term cyber with security. Really, when it comes to security, I don't know how to secure cybers. I'm not even sure what a cyber is. If we're talking about information security, regardless of what form that information is, that I know how to protect. So what I want to help you do, they might help you build a great cybersecurity. I'd like to help you build a great information security program. A good security program is living, right? It is you're gathering evidence as it is being created. You are as your processes change, you know what controls you're trying to adjust these processes to, and you can adjust them accordingly. Your security program should be different from week to week throughout the year. They also advertise, and I work for Filament. I use this product as well as resell it. I did have a much nicer result for this year's third-party audit than I have ever had in years past. They advertise passing audits with ease. I think it's changing the way you approach the audits. I don't, just like you guys, just like everyone else, I have never, ever liked that week before the review where everybody's scrambling, everybody's running around and trying to pull everything together and make sure you have this and make sure you have that and go through that fire drill. This is the week before my regulatory review right now. One of my analysts is sitting here, he's probably chuckling on the call himself, but we're really a lot calmer going into this one than we ever have been in years past. Through crosswalking, if you are subject to multiple different security regulations, right? So in my case, we have NIST 853, Gramm-Leach-Bliley, the New York CRR 500 rules, as well as a few others. We can create a security program, map it to NIST 853, and crosswalk it to other frameworks so that when we do have to demonstrate compliance with other frameworks, that evidence is already right there, it's up to date, and it's ready to go, or there are just a handful of gaps that we have to fill in prior to being ready to go with an audit. And then the other thing is you can use your well-reviewed security program as a marketing tool to show that you are in a better position to manage your customers' information than your competitor is. With security being as hot as it is right now, there is a lot of that. There's a lot of value in that type of marketing.
Hey, Art, we had another question.
Shoot.
We had another question. Yeah, we had another question come in, and I'll kind of paraphrase it. But if you're the auditee, so if you're an organization that's working with somebody like Filament Essential Services, and you're thinking about kind of how to measure the effectiveness of how well somebody has basically represented you during the auditing process, like, is it basically all about, hey, did I get the sign off from the auditor, or are there other areas that you look to be kind of assessed in terms of your performance? That might be minimizing business disruption, or the time it takes, or whatever it is.
So really, it depends on the auditor, right? And the purpose of the audit. If you have an internal auditor, it's, the internal auditor they're really your friend. It's their job to bring to light anything that is an issue that could end up hurting the company down the line. If you're doing a third-party audit, where you're hiring the auditor, that's probably like middle of the road, right? You want to use this for advertising, you want to demonstrate compliance, you're still trying to put your best foot forward, but they can also partner with you to help find those areas where there is more of a problem, that's a landmine in your path that's you're about to step on, right? That's the third-party auditors. In my case, Ernst & Young, that was they were acting as our third party there. That was much better than if I would have done that with a comptroller or a federal banking regulator. And the regulators, those are that last group of auditors, right? They're the ones that are typically paid by the finding, where they're trying to find the gotchas. They're the ones where you want to manage them the most closely. You can again, when we were talking about asking you what time it is, or do you know what time it is? Auditors do like to use the uncomfortable silence to try and get you to volunteer information. They teach it in Auditor 101, and what we have to be comfortable with as an auditee, especially with the regulators, is either sitting in that silence or filling that silence with talk about your favorite sports team or the weather, stay away from politics, and but you can fill the uncomfortable silence, but don't fill it with any of the information that they're looking for, and they'll get on to the next question. Does that kind of answer the question?
I think it does. If it doesn't, speak up. We had another question come in, and it's basically, of all the audits that you've been in on the auditor side and on the auditee side, like at what stage kind of along the process do you most often see surprises, and bad surprises, presumably? Can you speak to that?
So when we start out, if it's an organization that we are that's new to having a security program, or they're just trying to do a security program kickoff, we do start out with a gap assessment. And it's basically, we go through the controls and interviews and talk to them, and just, do you do this? Yes or no. If yes, great. We'll look at it later on. If you don't do that, let's look into this process a little bit, look at the controls, and see why that particular issue is there for you. One of my favorites, and the coworkers that are on the call are groaning because I'm talking about account management again. But account management is a great control. When you're forcing your administrators to go out and take a look at your the user accounts that are on their machine and reauthorize all of those user accounts. So, does Robert really need to have this account on this system today, right? He may have needed it 6 months ago. He may have needed it 2 years ago, but he's doing all this fancy marketing stuff. He doesn't need to have an account on the log server anymore. Performing that analysis limits the attack surface for the bad guys out there. So when we talk with one of my larger educational customers, when we first got them to start doing account management review, they're like, well, there's 10,000 plus users on this system. I can't look through all those. It's like, all right, so you're saying that all of those users are still necessary on that system? Well, no. As I'm looking through it, I see Betty here, and I know she retired about 8 years ago. Okay, so Betty retired, and you have her. Those are the kind of gotchas I tend to find. It's where we're not doing the basic blocking and tackling on the security program. Not the it's not finding that they don't have a next-gen firewall or EDR or any of the big tools. It's usually those the catches that I find more often than not are we're doing something the way we're doing it because that's the way we've always done it, and nobody's ever challenged why we do it that way.
Well said. We got a couple more questions, but Art, why don't we kick it back to you, because I know you got a little bit more to cover.
Okay, so I did talk about the although some of this is for the benefit of Aptega, this wasn't a clean, easy, perfect install for us. It has been an evolving solution. When we did first start putting our evidence up in, we ended up with multiple copies of the same evidence each one tied to different controls. Tyler, one of my analysts, did catch that early on, and we ended up consolidating that. As you can see in that documents picture there, it's a little bit small, but the subcontrol count there. So for that the first piece of evidence is a Splunk audit report. It was gathered on the 28th of December of 2022. That's another piece that we learned with naming conventions. We found the date of the evidence is the date it was uploaded, not always the date it was collected. So since our auditors go by the birth date of the evidence, we had to have a method in place to show the when an evidence or a piece of evidence had a birthday and was therefore no longer able to be used. So we started throwing our dates in front of our file names, and then we started linking them to the individual controls that they have. So now if I update that Splunk audit report sometime around the 28th of December next year or this year, it'll automatically tie that piece of evidence to those 5 different subcontrols where it's being used as evidence. The calendar, that's another one of those ones where we were trying to schedule out and make sure everybody had a task for updating the pieces of evidence that they were able to, or they were required to update. It made for a very busy looking calendar, and it quickly became tough to use. So that was one of those other things where we've been working with Aptega and on the customer as a customer as well as a representative for our customers to get enhancements. And they've been very good at working with us to make sure that their tool is the most usable tool out there. And lastly, we really had a little bit of an issue just helping our auditor understand Aptega and how to use it and how to work through it. So, and that one's all on us. Excuse me. If your security program doesn't require a system security plan, NIST 853 does require that SSP or system security plan. One of the great features of Aptega is for each of the controls that you are putting evidence in for, you also have a notes field where you, for us, what we've done is in that notes field, we write plain language, this is how we meet this control. That information can be exported into the SSP, which is a document that we have to maintain for our NIST 853 compliance. It's also a really big, hairy, awful document to create. I put it off for a couple of years when taking over the security program here. And the first audit that I went through after I had it, I was kicking myself for having put it off for so long. When the auditor asks you a question on how you are meeting the control, when you have that SSP, you no longer have to remember how you meet that control. You have that information written down, ready to go. The same goes through for all of your engineers. They have a copy of the SSP. They know how they do these things, but the notes for how they do them also kind of gives them the bounds for what the control is asking for and what answer they should be giving the auditor, instead of, you know, when the auditor asks them, do you know what time it is? Yes. Well, what time is it? 12 o'clock. You know, and going on to, it kind of gives them the bounds for that. All of the programs within Aptega, all the security programs that Aptega supports does have that notes field. And even though all of them don't require all of the control security programs don't require an SSP, you have that functionality of the SSP built into the process. So this year, I had my audit going on. Scope the review just like normal. It's my regular auditor. We have very good rapport, and it went very well. That piece gives me the evidence request list. I looked to Tyler. Tyler showed me the 15 or 20 documents that were out of date that we had to make sure were shored up. The rest of them were all in Aptega and ready to go. So it was a real simple evidence gathering this year. We sat down to do the interviews, and usually it's 500 to 600 questions from the auditor. We're in the room for about 3 days, and my voice starts to feel kind of like it does right now, where I've been talking too much and not listening enough, and just, you know, that grilling test. So this year we gave them access into Aptega, and we just gave him, rather than using the Audit Plus, we just gave him read access into our security program. Instead of 600 questions, in 2.5 days of sitting in the room with the auditor, we had 3 questions related to the security program. He would look at the notes, he would look at the evidence that we had in there. When we got the draft report, he gave us a few recommendations to supplement the evidence that we had, but there were no findings on the report. And again, instead of 600 questions asked and answered, he had 3 clarifying questions that he asked specifically about controls. Our remediation period was really going in and just adding in the additional information that he was looking for, and we're golden, right? So this was, I did want to put the the REM video of shiny happy people holding hands, but our marketing team didn't think that would be relevant to everybody in the audience, so we have the smiling sun. It was a much cleaner process for me this time than it ever has been in the past, and I'm actually looking forward to going through what we're going to go through with the regulators, just to see how it turns out with them. In conclusion, we talked about just establishing, maintaining that security program. Whatever security program you put in place, make it work for you. The governance, risk, and compliance tools, Aptega being the one I have the most experience with, are awesome for taking the stress out of audits and look at it as a chance to show everything it is that you're doing. I actually, this wasn't not part of the presentation, and this is completely serendipitous, but one of my customers texted me over the weekend, and this is going to actually, I'm going to have to work this into a marketing quote somewhere, but it's kind of, this customer texted me Sunday afternoon and said, it's kind of sick now that I'm forcing myself to put together all this documentation and manage it in Aptega. It's actually rewarding and a little fun to see what we've gotten accomplished. So it's, as a consultant in this case, that was just one of those proud dad moments for me. It's having everything put together, not waiting for the last week before the audit, having a tool that helps you keep it updated and ready to go, not only makes it easier for you to maintain the security of your system, but it also helps you to not make your CISO want to jump off a cliff whenever an auditor comes sneaking around. Any more questions for me?
Art, first of all, that was awesome, and we appreciate the kind words after we recovered from the cyber insurance or the cybersecurity drive-by. These silly marketers, man.
My guys do that too, and whenever they put things up there about cybersecurity, I cringe, but I also know that that's a Google ad word, and they have to do what they can do to gather the to get the clicks, to get the views. So I understand it, but it hurts me every time I see my name in cybersecurity anything, and I'm just like, no. Take it out of my quotes. Take it.
Point taken. So we got a couple of questions. One of them's quick, a technical question, but kind of as you were going through the technical specs, do the auditors? There's a question about, do the auditors see the notes in the SSP?
You have the ability to let them see what you want them to see. So there is an assessment plus function within Aptega where you create different cards and you can move them through. You can say this is import the evidence request list in it, assign out each piece of evidence to whoever it is that's doing it, let them gather it, move it to a ready for review so that you as the CISO can review it and say it's ready for the auditor, and then the auditor sees whatever it is you're giving them the ability to see through that. So you can manage it. In our case, we did give them full access to the SSP.
Good stuff. There were several questions about whether this presentation is going to be available after the fact. Yes, we're going to email it to you. It'll be available on our website as well. So look for that probably tomorrow morning. And then Art, there was just kind of a high level question about kind of how you view the relationship between information security, compliance, getting insured, getting cyber insurance, and maybe kind of getting ready to meet an audit. Like, where does this might be an obvious question, but you don't want to wait for the audit to process to come to kind of get your stuff together. What advice do you give people who are kind of getting this stuff off the ground?
So really, it's start out with whether you do it yourself or you ask somebody else to come work on it with you. It's doing that gap assessment, finding the security program that you want to start with. And I always recommend comprehensive security programs like in the unfortunately named Cybersecurity Framework from NIST, as well as the NIST 853, NIST 800, 171 are good comprehensive security frameworks. PCI DSS is a little too focused on just the financial side. Graham Leach Bliley is a little too focused just on your the documentation side of your processes. So I do like some the ISO 27000 family is another good comprehensive security program that you want to try to adopt. Some of that is dictated by your clientele as well. So your clients may say, this is the framework that we want you to be ready for, or your regulators will come and say, you'll do it this way. We have NIST 853 is the one that we've done the most work with. The cybersecurity framework from NIST is kind of a subset of NIST 853, and it is a really good, it's a comprehensive, almost a starter program, right? It'll help you get to where you need to go first. The 20 critical controls from originally put out by SANS is another great one to start with, because it seems relatively simple. 20 controls, right? The only problem with the advantage that CSF has over the 20 critical controls is some of the 20 critical controls include a little more things that you would expect out of a mature program, like penetration testing and red team, blue team work. That you want to have a more mature program before you're inviting people to come in and beat the crap out of your network.
Well put. And by the way, we really appreciate all the engagement. We typically don't get this many questions. So Art, that's a testament to you. We appreciate you being here. Thanks for the great presentation. If we could get an REM video into the next presentation, I think that would be awesome. We got a bunch of UGA people over here, so big time REM fans at Aptiga for what it's worth.
All right, I'll see what I can do.
All right, cool. And this is how you reach Art. If you want to jot down his email address or his phone number, please reach out to him. We're going to try to get him on a podcast here in the next couple of weeks as well. And again, this recording will be made available to you probably sometime tomorrow. So be looking for the email. It'll be posted on our website as well. All right. Well, thanks for joining us, Art. Great job. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Hopefully you got something out of this.
Awesome. See ya.